Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm on vacation again. My family and I are off to our annual Rehoboth Beach family reunion that we've been doing since the early 2000s. This is the beach where Biden fell off his bike, and if I'm lucky, I'll be able to catch a clip on my phone of him doing something dumb and then be able to sell it and cash in. This is America, and I can dream. And while I'm on vacation, I have a very special 2 episodes for you. I'm taking you back in time to the year I started my podcast. This was the time when I was selling partnerships for Oakley at the Olympics and working with some other cool brands to generate partnership dollars for them. It sounded cool on paper, but really the job sucked. It was cold calling for the most part, and my boss was the most miserable person I've ever met. I hated her. But if you ask her, she'd tell you that I was her best friend, because she was, and I'm sure still is, certifiably crazy. But I was lucky. She liked me, but at the same time, she was so miserable to the other employees that I needed to get out of there. So I planned my podcast on the clock, all while crushing selling partnerships. And then I took 3 weeks of vacation all in a row, and when I returned, I quit my job a day after I came back because my boss was being so mean to one of my coworkers that it was crushing his spirit and ruining his self-esteem. My boss was blindsided by me leaving, and it felt so good to get out of there. I still think about her every so often, and I always hope for the worst. Does that make me a bad person? Well, that's debatable, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what I was doing then. And at this point in life, I had risked everything on something I had no idea how to do, a podcast. And it was time for me to figure out how to actually record and edit, all while trying to sell my show, which I was going to call the Powell Movement. The first people I reached out to was Powder Magazine, and they were not only interested in my idea, they decided that they wanted to pay me $250 a week to do a podcast for them. And while that seemed like a good way to build an audience quickly for myself, I soon found out that it would be the worst decision of my short podcast career. But we can get into that a little bit later. First, we had to put together a deal for the show that I decided we would call Sponsored. And my first deal point was that I wanted my name to be included in the show title. Because at first, the people at Powder were not into that. They didn't want my name associated with my show, which was crazy to me. The main dude there, he's a really talented writer, but he didn't like me that much. And I'm pretty sure the reason for that was that one year at the Powder Awards, which I hosted many years, I remember bringing him up on stage, and his intro wasn't one that he really liked. I think I brought him up on stage saying when he wasn't getting beat up in high school, he was a regional champion diver or something to that extent. It was really funny to everyone but him. But anyways, it did create a little conflict in our relationship. The second part of the deal was that I could create a spin-off show, Inappropriate Questions. And I did that to try to bring the audience that I was creating with the sponsored show over on Powder over to the Powell Movement feed so I could take that audience and have a built-in audience of my own. But that didn't totally happen. Not everyone who listened to Sponsored came over to Inappropriate Questions, which is why this is such a great best-of show because you're going to hear stuff that you've never heard before. So they had some pretty simple deliverables, nothing too complicated by any means. And on my end, what I needed to create for Powder was delivering an edited podcast each week for them to listen to. And if they determined that anything was too offensive or just plain wrong, they would let me know and I'd re-edit. And then I would send them the file back and we would launch that week's show. Pretty standard stuff. And when I think back to that time, what I should have done was launch the Powell Movement on my own without creating the sponsored podcast and have the Powell Movement grow organically over 7 years instead of 1 year of sponsored and 6 years of the Powell Movement. Anyways, when Powder pulled the plug on the sponsored show, which I'm sure we will get into, I pulled the plug on Inappropriate Questions and pulled them offline, waiting for the day that I could create a best of Inappropriate Questions show from the vault. And while the Powell Movement podcast has inappropriate questions to it these days, back then, the inappropriate questions were extra inappropriate. But I guess in this crazy world that keeps leaning towards offending people less and less, both me and my guests have gotten soft. And everyone needs to step their game up when it comes to inappropriate questions. I do want everyone to know that when we do head back to 2016 for the best of Inappropriate Questions, the sponsored years, I really had no clue of what I was doing with audio or editing. And while I was able to clean things up a lot for this best of episode, there was a lot of learning going on back then, and there will be clips where you can tell that. It's not bad though, and before we get into it, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. First, follow me on Instagram. I'll have updates all week of my beach trip, and hopefully I'll catch Joe Biden doing dumb stuff. You'll see me winning stuffed animals at the ring toss, me breaking records at Pop-A-Shot because I'm the best Pop-A-Shot player that you've ever met, and hopefully you'll get to see me doing some karaokeing, which is also a favorite pastime of mine at the beach. So yeah, while this show is about others, the intro and my Instagram, @ThePowellMovement, have a lot more to do with me, and I hope you follow that as well. Also, please review the show wherever you listen and tell a friend about the show. It really does help things grow. Finally, I want you to please support my sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Rollerblade, Elan Skis, and Peter Glen Ski and Sports. Now, it's time to open the Inappropriate Questions Vault from an era I fondly remember as the Obama years. So we're going to start things out with week 1 of the podcast for me. I was genuinely nervous when I recorded my first few episodes. I mean, I had quit my job and I was going all in on this project, and I had to make it work. I remember not being able to get any sleep the night before Sean Pettit's interview launched because there was a hum in the background that I couldn't get rid of, and I thought it was going to ruin the podcast before it even got started. 7 years later, I realized that audio quality is very important, but little things like a faint hum aren't going to make people stop listening. And for my first episode, I selected Sean Pettit for a reason. I knew him well at the time due to me being his team manager at K2 for years. And while he was young, he was respected by generations of skiers, and he was wise beyond his years. Sean is one of those kids that came from nothing. He lived in a 1-bedroom basement apartment in Whistler with his mom and brother, and he ended up blowing up in the ski world while he was still really young, and he handled that success so well. Mr. Pettit was in his early 20s when we recorded for the first time, and for my first Inappropriate question, I decided to ask him about a threesome that I heard he was invited to and declined. Here's the first of many inappropriate questions you'll hear this episode. What's the wildest you've seen groupie related or just crazy like that in your life with your own eyes, whether you are part of it or not, and you don't have to name any names?
Sure. Groupie related? Yeah, I can tell you this one, sure. I mean, Mike, to be honest, it happens a lot. You know, going on a movie premiere tour and these parties and stuff, people getting drunk and crazy things happen.
Yep.
But this one time, just cute girl around, and I think we were at a poster signing and chatting with her after that. And then this is a party later on in the city. This is in Montreal, and she was out and about partying, and then her and this dude are kind of talking, a little ways away from me, and then this guy comes up to me. He asked me, he's like, "Hey, my girlfriend wants to know if you'll have a threesome with us." And I was so shocked that, a dude was asking me to have a threesome.
That's really weird.
It threw me off guard so much. I had to deny this. It was just too creepy. This guy I don't know, who is this girl's boyfriend, asking me to have a threesome. And I just couldn't imagine just being in the same room with this dude. So I freaked out.
Yeah, I can imagine you've been tunnel buddies with other people before, but not in that type of situation.
No, not in the same tunnel at the same time. I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So Sean showed me that he wasn't afraid to answer my questions. And I had thought a lot of these questions wouldn't get answered because the athletes didn't want to put themselves in a position where people could look down on them or judge what they were doing. But Shawnee P answered. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And it said, I can ask whatever I want on this podcast. People are going to answer. And for the really inappropriate shit, I'll get other people to ask those questions. And if they're weak, well, I can just jump in and create questions for them, as being inappropriate is something that I'm really good at. And now that I have Sean answering inappropriate questions, the next thing I wanted to find out was what happens when inappropriateness plays a part in a person losing their job. So here's my next question for a young Sean Pettit. What's the wildest thing you've ever seen someone do to lose a sponsor? And that can be either you've seen it or you heard about it.
I mean, I've heard of some crazy things, but I think when you witness something firsthand, it's more eye-opening.
Yeah.
I remember being at a party in Vancouver. I won't name any names again, obviously, but
sure.
I remember this dude, snowboarder. He is at a party, and the party is thrown by one of his sponsors, and he takes his skateboard and he smashes one of the windows at this club because he got mad because he was like skating inside or something and couldn't skate inside. So like they were trying to throw him out, and he got all pissed off and he smashed one of the windows with his skateboard. And that was the end of it for him. was the last time he went to one of his sponsors' parties.
Oh, but they didn't drop him?
No, they did. Yeah, that was the last time he went to one of their parties.
Well, nothing sucks more than getting dropped by a sponsor, especially for when it's doing stupid shit. I mean, I've been dropped by a bunch of sponsors, mostly over the pandemic, and it totally sucks. You don't know how you're going to pay your bills, and you're scrambling to replace those lost dollars. At least I was. But Sean never had to deal with that. He's been on K2 forever, and it seems like these days he snowboards more than he skis, which is cool on one hand, but a shame on the other. I say that as Sean is a good snowboarder, and it's cool to see his style going downhill sideways. But Sean is a great skier, and he set the bar and kept raising it year after year. But when you split your time on skis and a snowboard, I think progression is something that only happens in the sport that you aren't as good at, and that's snowboarding for Sean. I have no problem with it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would love to see a Sean Pettit ski segment again, but not sure if that'll ever happen. Moving back to inappropriate questions, I had the least inappropriate person in skiing on the sponsored show with episode 2. It was the legendary Wong. Wayne drove up to my house from Tahoe, and it was about 105 degrees out. He came in, I offered him a bathroom and some water, and he declined both, saying that his wife was waiting in the truck, and they had a 5-hour drive ahead of them after they got done the podcast, and we needed to get recording. My studio was about 120 degrees at this point, and Wayne didn't complain at all, but when he left, he was dripping sweat and drenched head to toe. We both were, but we both didn't say anything about it. And with Wayne, the inappropriate questions that Sean Pettit asked him, Wayne didn't have any interesting answers. But Wayne did put together a groupie question for pro skier and pro personality Colby West, and here it is.
How many wild parties have you attended because of your celebrity status and had your own group of groupies?
Okay, a lot. We used to have a rule. I don't know if they still do it, but we used to have the 10% rule. So you had to spend 10% of whatever you won on the day on the boys at the bar. And I guess the craziest one was we were in France at Candide's event and we'd been touring. So we hadn't been, partying or doing anything. But Candide's event's just a big party anyway. And I remember Dumont comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, dude, so you've been doing pretty well lately." I'm like, "Thanks, man." He goes, "How about that 10%?" I was like, fuck. And it was like 10 of us at the bar. And so I just walked out to the bar. I owed $6,000 or something. So I just went up to the bar and was like, "How much for that big bottle of champagne?" The French dude's like, "This bottle? You want this bottle?" I just look like a scumbag. I'm in my ski gear and stuff. I'm like, "Yeah, that." He's like, "Do you want this bottle? It's 2,500 euro." And I was like, "All right, give me 2 of those." And he was like, "You want 2?" And I just pulled out like $5,000 in cash and just handed it to him. It was pretty fucked up. But yeah, I mean, looking back, it's pretty reckless behavior, but I wouldn't take it back for the world. We had
You're
such a
24, man.
Yeah. And so then with the ladies, I think the best party times are probably in Sweden at Yoon's event. It's crazy there. Yoon used to give out, he had these keys that everybody had. And of course, everybody in the town knows that we're coming there for the event. And so there's just like tons of girls. And Yoon, a couple of different years, he made it my responsibility to get as many ladies to the party as possible. So I would go outside and I knew the bouncer pretty well. So I just chat up the girls and bring in as many women as I possibly could. So it was just like 10 or 12 of us hanging out and then just like 50 women just milling around. Like no one's talking, doing anything, but they were there. It was just insanity, man. We would just destroy those condos. It was terrible in a good way.
What is so funny to me is that Colby became this huge party guy in skiing, but when I met him, he was living in his piece of shit Saab, he was totally sober, and he was going contest to contest trying to make a name for himself in skiing. He was kind of quiet, but also really funny, and he would always stay at my house. My roommate at the time, Ryan Schmies, we both worked at K2, and we had a room called the College Room that was full of ski memorabilia and couches. And when pro skiers would come to Seattle, most of them would stay with us. That's how I got to know the sober Colby, and when he blew up, he changed sponsors and started partying. What wasn't funny about all this is what happened with Colby's podcast. Colby is famous for doing impressions, and I was having him do some on the show. I wanted to showcase his talents, and I thought it was really funny, the stuff he was putting together. When I finished the podcast, I sent it over to Powder. The only feedback I got from my douchebag Powder contact was that I was too nice to Colby. This guy actually said to me, "I was surprised you didn't try to reach through the phone and give Colby a hand job." Like I said, that guy sucked, and if you look deep enough into it, I believe he is the reason that Powder ultimately folded. because under his leadership, he tried to turn the Skiers magazine into the New Yorker and he failed. But that's another story, and the least of my concerns at this point in time. The day the show goes live, we get a comment about the racist and sexist comments in the podcast. And that's some shit I take seriously, as there was some inappropriate things in there, but I wasn't really thinking with a racist and sexist filter, unfortunately. I think a lot more like that today. I immediately emailed Powder telling him that I saw the comment come through and that I'm editing out questionable parts of the podcast and resending it over to them so they could re-upload it and get rid of the other version of the podcast. I do that, and then they throw me under the bus with a comment that has since been deleted. The comment was something to the effect of, "We don't approve of this type of content at all. The podcast is done by a third party, and this is all on him. We have asked him to remove the inappropriate parts of the podcast, and he won't be doing it again." I couldn't believe that shit. It was like, fuck you, Powder. This is your content, and you're supposed to be listening for this shit, as that was part of our deal. You're supposed to be the final ears and telling me if there's anything inappropriate or wrong that needs to come out of the podcast. But instead, you miss something offensive, and when it's time to blame somebody, you throw me under the bus. So again, fuck you. And on top of all of this, you're supposed to be sharing the numbers with me. But I'm guessing that after week 1, when the podcast hit number 27 on the iTunes sports chart, the people at Powder didn't want to show me the numbers because I would ask for more money. And from there, I never saw any of the numbers that Powder was supposed to be sharing with me on a weekly basis. But part of that's on me. I mean, I knew I didn't like a few of the people at Powder before I started working with them, and the ones that I did like, I really didn't trust. So put all the blame on me here. That's what Powder would do. I should have never worked with them. But I did, and that's why we have the next inappropriate question. And Colby's questions may not be that creative, but he put together a few for Chris Benchetler, and you can tell from question 1, he was going straight for the jugular. Here it is.
Could we ask how many chicks he's hooked up with or how many chicks he's had sex with?
Yeah, do you want to find out how many he hooked up with, how many he had sex with, how many he got a blowjob from? I guess we need to clarify because I wouldn't want him to really reveal too much because he is a married man, so we should only have him reveal one part of that.
Okay, I guess how many women have you had sex with?
How many women have you had sex with? And do we want to do protected or unprotected here?
Both. You don't want to divulge too much because he's married, but you're asking if he's protected. I mean, I feel like that's divulging a lot there.
It's for a podcast. It's pretty important.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so that's going to be an awesome answer from Chris, I have a feeling. So that was Colby's second question. I think we were going with how many chicks have you had sex with other than your wife?
That's a funny question. It's not a lot, but I'm not someone that keeps track. And before we got together, I was young, so I had only had one girl before Kimmy, and then she moved away, and we had like a 6-month to a year break quite long before we got married because we've been together since I was 17. So in that 6-month to year span, I don't know, there was a couple girls at that point, maybe 3, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
So we're talking about like 5 in life.
Yeah, before Kimmy, probably.
Wow.
Yep, not that many.
I didn't think you'd answer that question. I thought you would stay away completely, but there we go. Colby, it's only 5, which is for Colby West back in his prime. I think that was a weekend for him.
Yeah, I think they would like 5 at a time. I remember most of those guys would had a competition and wanted to count all of them, but I'm not too concerned with that. I'm pretty happy with where I'm at in my life.
Well, I never heard about that competition, and I don't think we should talk about it anymore. Kind of reminds me of the Spur Posse, and if you don't remember them, they had a competition as well and ended up as global news.
Wow.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with Rollerblade, the brand that pretty much invented the sport of inline skating. If you haven't been on inline skates in a while, you are missing out on the most fun way to get in shape. Think a full body workout without the knee pain and jarring impact of running or the expense and travel hassle of a bike. And skating can be whatever you want it to be. Adrenaline pumping high-speed fun, recreational fitness, freestyle, skate parks, the opportunities for fun and adventure are endless. On top of that, there's no better way to cross-train for ski season. And Rollerblade makes getting your ski legs back easier than ever with their Skate to Ski app, which is available on the App Store. To find out more about the Skate to Ski app and all the Rollerblade inline skates, head on over to rollerblade.com. My next sponsor is Elan Skis, and I'm in love with my ripsticks. They are so fun and lively, all while remaining light and stable. And there's something different about skis designed in the Slovenian Alps by real skiers. And what's really amazing, is that they built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art factory. And Elan let me know that this independence from fossil fuels, along with the new solar plant, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. So not only will Elan Skis make you a better skier, but they are putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to the planet. To find out more about all things Elan and what they're doing with their factory, head on over to elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is a place you can get your Elan skis, your rollerblade inline skates, and everything for your summer fun. Think wakeboarding, swimming, and so much more. I'm talking about Peter Glen Ski and Sports, and they have been the one-stop shop for all your needs for over 60 years. And these days, if you can't get to their store, well, you still have the same great experience online over at peterglen.com. The site has all the brands, all the products, and they offer free shipping on orders of $49 or more, a no-hassle return policy, and they price match any reputable shop on the web. So please support the brand that supports me, and check out Peter Glen before you buy somewhere else. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. So Colby has another question for Chris coming up. But before we get to that one, I need to bring up what the Benchetler Fasani family is going through right now. Kimmy Fasani, who's a badass pro snowboarder / mother of two / wife of Chris Benchetler, has cancer. For the past 2 years or so, she's dealt with chemo, radiation, a double mastectomy, I believe that's what it's called, and so many other treatments that I'm not even aware of. It's so scary, and I think about her all the time as I can't imagine having 2 little ones and being uncertain about your future with them. But Kimmy is a strong woman, and medicine is better than ever, and while I'm not a prayer guy, I do think about Kimmy a lot, and I try to send good vibes her way. I think everybody else should do the same thing. And while I was thinking about Kimmy, I totally forgot what Colby's last question for Chris is, so I'm just going to play it for you right now.
Yeah, I want to know, like, what's, like, the worst after drunk thing that happened to you, like doing had to go skiing or doing something like you wake up and it's Bluebird. Like, tell me about, like, when you didn't want to go skiing when you were hungover, but you had to.
Okay. So when you didn't want to go skiing, you went too big the night before, and you don't want to go at all the next day, but you have to. Tell us what happened that night before.
Does that work for you, pal?
I think that works for me. That'll be hopefully get us an inappropriate response.
I have had some big nights in my past, for sure. I don't think there's ever a time that I don't want to go, though, because I am way rather be outside and have fresh air and get the hangover taken care of versus just laying around and moping. So I kind of would actually prefer to go skiing after a big night, unfortunately, for that question.
Have you ever woken up in the morning and thrown up?
Oh, yeah, many times. I mean, that U.S. Open, I remember one of the first times, I think it was before your time, but Pettit was there. He was probably 11 or 12. And we had to compete the next day in half pipe, and I don't think I made it to the contest, so this will be a good story. I was only 17 maybe at that point. Could have been, actually I was probably younger if Pettit was that young. I was probably like 16 or 15, and I hadn't ever puked from drinking, so I started to make wagers with everyone that I wouldn't puke, and then I had started just drinking straight from the bottle. I have no idea what I was drinking, but Christian Sirianni was there. That was a good night for him too. Tyler, Chris Booth was there, a couple of the old school K2 boys. And yeah, I drank a lot, took all the money off the table, ran and locked myself in the bathroom and puked all night, I'm pretty sure. I don't entirely remember. And apparently Chris Booth and Christian Sirianni sang me to sleep. They sang Lean on Me once I finally got out of the bathroom. And then, I must have been 17 because Kimmy's involved in this story, actually. I guess I called her and told her I was dying when I was in the bathroom. And then the next day, the pipe competition, a lot of people didn't make it to the contest because we didn't all necessarily care about pipe too much. We were more slopestyle skiers. And Kimmy was trying to call everyone to see if I was alive because I didn't remember calling her at all. And she called Nate Abbott, was the person she finally got a hold of. And he was very hungover too. And he told her that he hadn't seen me all morning. And so she's back home thinking I died. I had no idea about my wager or anything that happened that night other than, yeah, people told me I just took all the money, locked myself in the bathroom, puked all night, and then didn't make it to the contest the next day.
Fair enough. Well, that's a good answer. You do have an answer for that, even though you thought you wouldn't. No, I always like to ski. I never not want to go ski. Well, that was a time, Chris, that you wanted to stay in bed.
That was a time. And I might have gone up to the hill after that. I just know I missed my half pipe run, which would have been early in the morning. But anyways, there you go.
I love that Chris is not afraid to share, because if you look at what the dude has done with his life and times, he is one of the most accomplished skiers of our time. And it's because he's a very smart guy who has a work ethic unlike most athletes out there. And he's not just an athlete. His art is arguably as good or better than his skiing. And the projects that he's made happen, because that's what he does. He comes up with ideas and he wills them to happen. And if you've seen the Grateful Dead movie that he made, Fire on the Mountain, it gives you an idea of what the dude is capable of. Not only did he get the Dead to let them use his music and likeness and image, he was able to get Bill Walton to narrate the movie. He was able to get his famous surf and snowboard and ski friends to contribute their time, and he created one of the greatest music-driven ski pieces of all time. On top of that, he's been the backbone at Atomic, turning the brand around with Jordan Judd, and he's done so much for that brand that they named him the creative director of Freeride and Freeski. So while some people look at Chris as an athlete, he's so much more than that these days. He's just so talented, and his vision is unmatched. And his interview lined up perfectly for Inappropriate Questions, because Michelle Parker was a former teammate of Chris Benchetler's when they were on K2, and they are great friends, which made it easy for Chris to come up with inappropriate questions for Michelle. And I'm not going to call Chris's question for Michelle a shitty one, but it kind of is.
I know her and my wife were climbing a multi-pitch route in the area a year or so ago, and they had a very shitty situation together where someone had to poop on the ledge next to the other, and it may or may not have been my wife. So I want to hear Michelle's shittiest situation, whether it's in the backcountry or in the summer. Her most embarrassing poop story, basically.
Okay, so you're thinking that this could be her most embarrassing poop story, pooping on a ledge next to your wife, but really it could be, there could be a ton of stories like that. So this is what we're hoping to find out, is pooping near your wife or your wife pooping near her. But really, we want the best poop story Michelle has. Is that correct, Chris?
That's correct.
So, Michelle, we're looking for your best poop story. And when I say your best poop story, Chris is under the belief that you either took a poop next to his wife while climbing, or she took a poop next to you. He would not clarify there. Either one is gross. But then I thought that's probably not her worst poop story. I mean, I know Michelle, and she's probably got a lot of gross ones. So can you tell us your worst poop story, or was that climbing with Kimmy? Was that the worst one?
Just to clarify, we were on a mission, a 24-hour mission. Our goal was to climb the East Buttress of Whitney in under 24 hours, door to door from Mammoth. So yeah, I was with Kimmy and one other girl, and we hammered it out. We did 23 hours, and it was the first snowfall of the year. So we're like up on this multi-pitch where we had never been before. And of course it starts snowing. It was 50% chance. And when we were at the base of the rock, we're like, 50% chance, let's do it. And midway up, we're like, holy crap, things just got real. It's like snowing super hard and freezing cold. And yeah, that was Kimmy, to clarify. She took a poop on the ledge. Dang it, I didn't want to bring her into this.
Her husband brought her into it.
Yeah, totally. Right next to me, and it was like such a great moment for us. I was laughing hysterically. And this is a common practice in climbing, but it was my first time experiencing it. It was great to be with her. She's one of my best friends ever. My most embarrassing poop story, I love these. So mine is, I would say it was down in Argentina. I was coaching and guiding a group of kids, like 8 of them or something. I think I was with Garrett Russell at the point, and we all live in such close quarters. So when one person gets sick, it just gets passed around. And this sickness this particular year was like you had diarrhea. But I still had to coach, so I didn't really take any days off. I would just go up and then like coach these kids and always have toilet paper with me. But on this day, I didn't have toilet paper with me. Normally you could like sneak away and like figure it out while the kids were like doing their thing, having a lunch break or something. But I was like mid-run and it hit me and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. So I had to ask one kid to go find Garrett and get toilet paper and then like run it back up to me. And so my entire group's there and I'm just like, guys, I gotta take a poop right now. And yeah, I took a poop just on like the middle of this run, and Garrett was there to save the day with some mountain money, aka toilet paper. And that was probably my most embarrassing moment with poop.
I love that term, mountain money. It makes me think, what would happen if everyone was broke in terms of mountain money that day for Michelle? But she's resourceful, and I'm sure she would have figured it out. And while I could tell you a lot about my relationship with Michelle Parker, I'm going to hold off on doing that as she's a first-time guest on the Powell Movement in the coming weeks. While her sponsored podcast was great, I'm anticipating her Powell Movement will be her best interview of all time. And I know, that sounds really cocky, but that's the goal I have with all of these. I want them to be the best. So Benchetler asked Parker her questions, and it was all insider information. But Michelle had to ask Kent Kreitler questions, which is tricky, as I don't think Michelle really knew Kent back then. And when Inappropriate Questions first started, when a guest couldn't come up with a good question, they leaned on me. And that's exactly what happened with Michelle, and I think it turned out a little uncomfortable for Kent. Michelle, I think we should go with question number 3, and please try to raise your level of inappropriateness, or if I need to, I will jump in.
Yeah, I need you to jump in.
All right, so I guess this is almost like a yes or no question, but something that I'm sure a lot of men have been wondering for a lot of years. So Kent is a yogi, so he's very flexible, and he's able to get his body in positions that other people aren't able to get their bodies in. Is there anything special that Kent can do to himself based on his flexibility that only other men have dreamed of?
Yes, I like this one.
So the question is, you are a yogi. You are able to get in many different positions. You are more flexible than most people out there. Marilyn Manson once had 2 ribs removed, so he could do this. We were wondering if you are able to do anything to your body that most other men can't, although everyone's thought about.
That's pretty classic. I wish.
We know you've tried.
God, I wish I could. My answer on that is I wish I was more flexible than I am. Like yoga's been awesome. The physical side of yoga has been great for recovering and getting close to 50 and still feeling really good. But I feel like a lot of us skiers, our bodies are so entrained to be so tight, like with like the lifetime of rigidity that you get through years of skiing. I don't know how many people really get to the level of flexibility of Dharma Mitra or someone like that, or Marilyn Manson.
So how close can you get? Can you kind of get your head there like it's a microphone?
Hold on, I'm gonna see.
All right, this is what video Skype's all about. This is so weird to watch, Kent.
Go with the microphone.
All right, well, I love that you gave it the old try.
No, the thing is like, oh, never mind.
No, go ahead. The thing is...
I'm not going to go there. I'm just not going to go there.
So that was amazing that Kent even tried that. And Kent's inappropriate questions for Sammy Carlsen weren't that inappropriate and didn't make the cut for this podcast. And it should be known that the podcast I did with Sammy back then was a controversial one. Well, not really controversial, but Sammy wasn't happy with my interview, and that's okay. I had great sources around everything I asked because I knew that Sammy could be sensitive about some of the questions I was asking. And boy, was I right. While the interview was good and accurate in my opinion, Sammy was and most likely still is pissed at me about it. That's the only time someone has come back angry after a podcast. Well, that's not entirely true. Maude Raymond emailed me a year after her podcast went live and said she was bummed on it and she didn't realize what the podcast was going to be beforehand. I let Maude know that as disappointed as she was, I was even more disappointed. I put so much time and effort into making a great interview, and if you listen to that podcast, you'll get the idea. She didn't answer any of the questions I asked, and it was frustrating, but whatever. I'm sorry that both Maude and Sammy were bummed on me, and I can live with that. While Sammy wasn't a big fan of his sponsored podcast, he killed it with asking living legend Glen Plake about getting busted.
All right, question number 1, Mr. Plake. While you're filming for Blizzard of Oz, you had possibly some complications with the law that may have forced you either by choice or maybe you were kicked out of the country, but what'd you do that caused you to get kicked out of the States?
So the question from Sammy Carlsen is, during Blizzard of Oz, you were not allowed back into the U.S., and what did you do that kept you overseas?
Just standard drug charges. I guess the detailed side of it, I was nursing a broken femur at the time, peddling a little illegal narcotics. I didn't really care the flavor, whatever could make me the most money. That particular night, we used to get quite a lot of yield by selling a bunch of mushrooms. So while I had a flat tire on the side of the road, I was on crutches, fixing a flat tire, and typical highway patrol pulls over. What are you doing? Next thing you know, they feel that there's some, driving a 72 Cadillac. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. Anyways, long story short, they do a search of the car and find just about everything they needed to find, including just under 40 pounds of mushrooms.
Holy crap. ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a garbage bag full, by the way.
40 pounds. Man.
Well, one thing led to another, and I ended up going to jail. They ended up letting me out of jail because they couldn't prove that there was anything illegal about them.
Huh.
Big deal. Mushrooms, bag of mushrooms. I was out picking mushrooms. So what? Gonna make a salad. Unbeknownst to me, over the course of some time, some tests had been made. The case was reinstated. And then about half a year later, a warrant's put out to my arrest, and I wasn't totally aware of it. Anyways, blah, blah, blah. I was in a bunch of trouble. And when Blizzard of Oz came about, or was going to be coming about, we had filmed in Snowbird. There was rumors of possibly going to Europe. I was actually scheduled for a court date. I had this, public defender. It looked like I was probably going to do about 6 years.
Damn.
And the public defender had not a lot going on, and I didn't have a lot going on, What do you do for work? Well, I was pounding nails and stuff, but, so did you graduate? No. Are you going to college? No. What are you doing with your life, Mr. Plake? Well, I have this dream that I'm going to be a pro skier, and I'm going to film movies and stuff and work with companies, maybe, kind of. It'll be cool. Really? So you're on the U.S. ski team? No, I'm not on the U.S. ski team. Okay. Case closed. Wham,
Yeah.
So I didn't have a very compelling story. So when I had an opportunity to go to Europe, I had a fresh passport. And honestly, I knew I was on a one-way ticket. And I got there. I didn't know where I was going. I was obviously looking into joining the French Foreign Legion to try to get my liberties back in one way or another. I didn't really reveal this to the guys until towards the end of the trip. As they were packing their bags, I kind of said, oh, by the way, you guys, I'm not going back home. I remember Trip looking at me going, "You're what?" I had nothing to go home to. I had a lot to face, but I had nothing to go home to. So I stayed. About 18 months later, a little shy of 2 years later, Stump's getting a hold of me, asking me what's the situation with my situation, how much trouble am I really in, what could possibly be done. The film is quite popular. They want to have you on the Today Show, la, 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 la. And I said, well, maybe we could. Better get a lawyer first and, somebody that can actually represent me. The good news to the story is the next time I did go to jail, while I certainly was in a lot of trouble, and I ended up doing 6 months right off the bat before they even wanted to talk to me, I was able to present a compelling story of a young man who had gone down the wrong roads due to an injury and had the brightest future ever known ahead of him, with a list of sponsors potentially ready to work with him if this court case was filled, and ended up doing another 6 months when it was all said and done, 9 years of probation, 1,700 hours of community service, quit drugs, quit alcohol, and live happily ever after. So that's it.
Wow, that's quite the story. That is 40 pounds. Jesus.
You know what's funny, dude? I had 100 hits of LSD sitting on the freaking window. I never did it. I used to sell it, but I didn't do it.
Okay.
I never really liked it. But I had 100 hits sitting on the dashboard and the hugest friggin' bud of weed sitting in the ashtray. When I got my car out of the impound, they were still sitting there. So I think the big bag of shrooms distracted them from some other stuff.
Good move. I have a decoy.
It was crazy. That was a crazy night. Palmer was part of that one too, because that was a mess. Because those guys, so Palmer and Vito and all my buddies, I mean, I'm 19. And they're not 19, so I'm the only adult technically, right?
Yeah.
And thank God, one of my freaking buddies, derelict brothers, goes, "We're riding in that truck. We just stopped to help the guy." Otherwise, I would have had all sorts of, because it says in the police report, possible charges pending for the delinquency of minors.
Yeah, and that would have taken it over the top, I would think.
Yeah, wouldn't have helped anyways. That was real. I was a true, real fugitive on the run, I'm proud to say.
It's time for round 2 of my sponsors, and I can't tell you how much I love the beer and other tasty beverages that the 10 Barrel Brewery creates. I'll always be a huge fan of the Profuse Juice and their Pilsner. And the craft cocktails, which have real hard A, are potent and kick ass. But what I've really been enjoying lately is their Clean Line seltzers. These are crisp, refreshing 100-calorie cans of awesomeness that's perfect for these hot summer days. My only complaint is that they go down too fast. So next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Clean Line and you'll have a new favorite seltzer. To find out more about the brand, the Pacific Northwest's best lineup of beverages, their all-time pro athlete team, and how much they support ski, snowboard, and bike, head on over to 10barrel.com. My final sponsor is Stanley. You remember them as the brand with the green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot, hot, hot. While they still make that iconic bottle, they do so much more than that. I mean, they did invent and perfect the category of keeping things hot and cold, and they've been proven to be better than those other fashion brands who rely on marketing, not product. But Stanley also has all you need for your camping and outdoor needs, and they're offering my listeners the best deal they offer, 30% off all Stanley products. And to get this deal, you're going to want to head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all lowercase and all one word, and you'll get that 30%. And orders over $100 all get a Powell Movement beanie. Those are my sponsors. Please support them. Now let's get back into the podcast. So you may have heard that story from Plake before. I've interviewed the guy more than anyone, I feel like, and that clip was in his Best of Plake episode that I put together for the podcast years ago. There are so many great things about Glen Plake. His passion, how opinionated he is, his knowledge of everything that seems to be going on in the ski season. That said, Plake also knows about all the important athletes and what they are up to. So when it came time for Glen to ask Cody Townsend inappropriate questions, I thought he would come up with something raunchy. Instead, he ended up praising Cody for his skiing of the crack, which wasn't inappropriate at all. Then he called out Cody for skipping out on a contest that Glen was a judge for. Cody ended up going on a photo shoot with Powder Magazine instead of attending the contest. And finally, Glen's inappropriate question is almost clowning Cody for something that he did. And you know what? Glen Plake can clown whoever the fuck he wants. So here he goes.
I'm trying to think of something kind of funny and not so damn serious when I just called him out. I'm a nationally ranked water skier, and I think snow skiing on waves is just really freaking dumb. What the hell? I mean, what are you trying to do here? I mean, you can't you can't swim with the crap. You need all this extra stuff. I mean, is that really the future? Or I mean, what?
So the question is, Glen has a ton of experience on water skis. He knows all about water skiing, and he knows about waves as well. And he does not believe that skiing and waves are meant to go together.
I just think it's so fun, just the weirdness of it. Do you consider skiing on waves a weird activity, yes or no?
Yeah, no, I agree with him. I think it's pretty stupid. You know, it was awesome that we did it because I definitely remember growing up being like 12 years old and like staring at waves and like kind of looking at the angle of it being like, oh man, you could like ski down it. Like it's steep enough. And so it was in my brain from being a young age that I was like, whoa, wonder if you could ever ski down waves. And so when we did that thing with Douglas and the Free Ski TV episode doing it, it was definitely like, there's just like, cool, we can actually do this. It was also the realization of, yeah, this is really stupid. Like I almost drowned once. Got held under a really long time. All the gear, you have to get tone in. And then when you're on the wave, it like really doesn't work that good. Like, you know, I grew up surfing and a surfboard works really incredibly well on a wave. Skis do not work that well on a wave. So, you know, most people ask me like, would you do it again? And I'm always saying, hell no. Like I would not do it again. So I'm in agreement with that, with Blake there. Yeah, it's pretty stupid. And it made for a lot of my surfer friends making fun of me for pretty much life. So I got to wear that one.
Oh, there's our ski surfer. Awesome.
Yeah, totally. Like I've been tagged in like fake pictures making fun of skiing on waves, like trying to be like, the same sort of thing that Glen said, like, oh, is this the future? And like tagging me in it and like surf media publications. I'm like, great. That's how I'm known in the surf world.
So Cody was clowned and totally agreed with what Glen Plake was saying. And you know what? Cody Townsend is a total badass. Yes, he's that athlete known for the 50 Project, which is pretty rad, but he's also one of the smartest skiers and best athletes in the industry. I mean, his dad was a high school football coach, he was the starting QB, and he grew up with Super Bowl champion quarterback Trent Dilfer in his life. So it's no surprise that he's an athlete. And his mom, well, she's a career investigative journalist and has a novel to her credit. So it's also no surprise that he's one of the more intelligent skiers that you could have a conversation with. And that's not to say other skiers aren't smart. It's just Cody is way smarter than me and most athletes I interact with. On top of that, He's a dad, he's part owner of Arcade Belts, and he's really, really funny. So when Cody heard that he was asking Greg Stump inappropriate questions, I'm sure he was salivating at this opportunity, and I'm going to play the first of Cody's 2 questions for Greg Stump.
I remember watching a movie when I was pretty young, and I forget the exact name of the movie, one of his weird ones after Blizzard of Oz. And when they're sliding around the desert on monoboards naked with their dicks tucked between their legs, and being young and just going, what is going on? So I wanted to know if he still tucks his dick between his legs when he monoboards naked.
So another solid question there.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me. That's Glen Plake and Dave McCoy. Cody's asking about the movie Dr. Strangelove. And Dr. Strangelove was a bit of a mess because it didn't snow that year. So I had 2 big problems. One was that Glenn had signed with Reichly Tyrolean, and we were sponsored by Solomon. So that was my first problem. And then the second problem is it didn't snow. There was no snow in Europe. The only place we got any footage for that thing was at Mammoth. So it was basically I was screwed. Here I was, Blizzard of Oz, License to Thrill, Dr. Strangelove, and we got no snow, and I can't show my star's feet, Glen Plake, because he's on the wrong product. So I had some challenges in making that movie, and that's why it's so weird. Like, everybody thinks I'm just nuts, but I didn't have any footage, geek footage, so we just had to keep coming up with bizarre stuff. So the mono thing, and Solomon at the time had just come out with their monocoque skis.
Yep.
So we thought, well, this will be funny. We'll make a play on the monocoque.
Okay.
And we'll go monoboarding, and these guys are naked and they don't have cocks. But it was Glenn that did the taping thing, and that was his idea, to tape his cock up his ass, right, and use duct tape. Right, and so that was his whole thing. So he thought that would be hilarious, and it was pretty funny. But for a lot of people, it was rather disturbing.
The most disturbing part of that could have been taking the duct tape off.
I was not participating in that, Michael. But yeah, I'm sorry, Cody, that you got so disturbed by that. I got a lot of trouble for that, I got to tell you.
So I've always heard that when you tuck your dick between your legs, it's called the lady. But I'm willing to guess that even that title is inappropriate these days. But I'm glad that Cody asked about that one. One thing I didn't mention when I introed Cody is that our interview had my biggest technology failure ever. We recorded 90% of the podcast on a Tuesday in 2016, and as we were about to close out, my computer crashed and I lost everything. I don't lose my temper very often, but I started screaming, fuck, 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 so loud that Alex O'Brien, who was staying at my house for a K2 shoot and was downstairs, was generally concerned. When this happened, I told Cody that I needed to call him back because I was going to try and save the hour that we recorded. But I had no idea what I was doing, and it was all lost. Cody was a great sport about it and gave me another hour the next day, but man was I embarrassed. Not only for losing the file, but for Alex, my wife, and Cody all hearing me lose my cool like that. I really thought I was going to cry, which is so dumb. I mean, this is just a podcast. But back to Cody. His last question is gold. It's the question that everyone has always wanted to ask Greg Stump.
Greg Stump had a lot of iconic movies and a lot of amazing sponsors that helped support him through it. But I wanted to see what was his biggest sponsor of his movie, the one he worked with the most. Was it acid or cocaine?
Well, nobody believes this, but I've never tried cocaine, not even once. And no one believes, but it's true. So cocaine, no. And I didn't try acid till I moved to Whistler, and I liked it. But no, I was very squeaky clean when I was making the movies, really. My life didn't spiral out of control till I moved to Whistler. Yeah. Well, no, I not that it spiraled out of control, but no, I wasn't. My biggest sponsors, no, it was neither acid or cocaine. The only piece of work, whether it's filming or editing, that I ever did while I was on acid was that great SEAL sequence from Groove Requiem with Crazy, because I had to get the movie done, and I stayed up all night and edited that whole ending, and I did take a tab of acid.
While Greg swears he's never done cocaine and only dabbled with acid, I've had a lot of beers with the dude. I've been to his house, an old dollhouse in Prineville, Oregon, and that place is as weird and eccentric as Greg Stump is. I can say my time at that house was full of laughs and stories, but it was also very, very strange. And I guess I'll say strange in a good way. And Stumpy, he's an absolute legend. He's the guy who changed the way that action sports movies were made. He brought the cool music, the quick cuts, the odd storylines. He was a visionary. And there are so many people that owe Stumpy for creating careers, creating a genre, and changing the game. But one thing Greg Stump is built for is inappropriate questions. Greg can be raunchy at times, and even though we didn't know who Hadley Hammer was, he made sure to take her out of her comfort zone in a way that only Greg Stump can do. So buckle up for 3 questions in a row for Hadley Hammer.
Let's see, what's my first inappropriate question? Do palma lifts make you smile?
That's a great question. I believe you're asking that because of the placement of the pommel lift. You're smiling already, it sounds like, which is great. I don't really know what he meant there, but maybe you can elaborate on that.
I mean, oh boy, yeah, I guess so, for sure. Jackson used to have so many pommel lifts, and that's like, yeah, they're great. Love a good pommel lift.
If so, is it a multiple smile?
Can't really play off that much more. Does that make you smile more than once? Are you capable of smiling more than once at any time?
Oh man, can I just plead the fifth on this one?
You would be the third person to plead the fifth on one of these questions.
Jeez, yeah. I mean, I guess, sure. If it's like a really long pommel lift, maybe. I don't know. Oh my God, these are funny.
Okay, let's see. Can we make more of the palma mess? What inappropriate question can I ask? Oh, has she ever had a freestyle moment?
Yeah.
He was asking if you had ever had a freestyle experience. I don't know if that's something that happens at a line team shoot. Do you know what he was talking about?
No. Am I that?
Yeah, in Greg's wording, he calls it a freestyle experience, but I believe this is my job to ask the question, right? So I believe he was talking about being with another female. I think that would definitely be what Greg Stump wanted to know, and something I'm sure you're totally comfortable sharing with the world.
Totally. I have not. I mostly spend my life with dudes in tents, so no. But I mean, Angel and I did go to Mount Hood, so
she camped with Angel in the woods at Mount Hood. She also pitches tents with. That's a good enough answer for that.
Oh man, Greg Stump, yikes. My palms are like so sweaty.
So Hadley Hammer was a little shaken after those questions from Stumpy. Most people would be. And keeping with the theme that Greg Stump had, Hadley was put into a strange sandwich of legends, where Greg Stump and Mike Douglas serve as the bread and Hadley serves as the meat in this case. She's sandwiched right in between them, so Greg Stump asked her the 3 questions, and Hadley had to turn around and ask Mike Douglas 3 inappropriate questions. Mike Douglas is squeaky clean. He's known as the godfather of twin tip skiing, and he doesn't do many inappropriate things. So it was up to Hadley to get really inappropriate or dig and get some dirt on Douglas. And I can't say she did for 2 of the 3 questions, but then she thought about what Mike Douglas does for a living these days. Yes, he's a pro skier, but he also runs Solomon Free Ski TV, and he spends a lot of time behind the lens these days. And she wanted to know about some of the questionable footage that Mike Douglas was able to capture.
I feel like he was also sort of the first to really get into the filming side. So maybe what is the most inappropriate thing he's ever filmed?
So Mike, what is the most inappropriate thing that you have ever filmed?
Tough one there. I mean, I was old enough when I got into the whole filming thing for real that I know better than to turn cameras on in sexual situations. It just never seems to go anywhere good. It's probably not that exciting. In the very G-rated version of Inappropriate would be, I was in Japan a couple of years ago, and I had spotted a bunch of these animals, kamushikas, in the forest as we were going up the chair. And I thought it would make a kind of a cool shot. And I blitzed down the mountain with my GoPro rolling and blazed right through the middle of this herd of them, which after the fact, I was kind of like, oh, that was pretty poor judgment there. Terrorizing animals.
Yeah, you're all about protecting our environment, just loving each other, and then you're going to go ruin the day of these animals who are just enjoying a day on the mountain.
Exactly. So I felt pretty bad about that, and that footage never got seen. I mean, I guess in the inappropriate angles that you guys always seem to put on this stuff, I definitely got some pretty interesting photos from back in the day and doing the movie tour stops and some of the boys signing some very interesting body parts of female fans. You always got to have a couple of those in your back pocket in case those guys get cheeky at some point in their lives. And what's the word I'm looking for?
Put in their place?
Yeah, put in their place, or blackmail potentially. Definitely got to have some blackmail material.
So you can hear the remorse in Douglas's voice about upsetting the animals in the wild. But the last thing I would have expected was Douglas saving images from the movie tours to use as blackmail on people. That's not something a squeaky clean guy does, blackmailing his friends. But since Douglas brought up the movie tours, I'm going to step out of order and jump into a question that I had for Skogen Sprang. Skogen is one of the early pioneers of the twin tip movement. He's a dude who came from snowboarding to take over skiing, and he would be one of those faces on the Mount Rushmore of new school skiing had he not had a terrible injury filming a lifestyle piece for ESPN. These days, Skogen is a U.S. ski team slopestyle coach, and you'll find him at places like the Olympics. But back then, Skogen was an innovator, and every fall he had a movie part, and I asked him about the debauchery that the MSP movie tour was. So you were on the road in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think I might have met you once at a Kahlua Rail Jam, the Sacred Hunger Tour. And there was a lot of people on. I think there was a K2 Willie Nelson tour bus. And I think you were part of that tour. And I want to know what the wildest thing that you saw while being on the road with that crew was. Because it was a rock star group of people. And there had to be a lot of crazy things going on.
That's some good memories right there. It was the old Willie Nelson bus.
And it broke down like 100 times.
Yeah, Freeze and K2, I think, bought it. Yeah, we had a motley crew. That was the Poor Boys MSP East Coast tour. You want me to pick one moment? I don't even know if I can. I mean, theoretically, I shouldn't remember any of the moments from that trip. So I might have to go with, I do not recall. No. I know Josh Lubeck was on the bus.
That's trouble.
That is trouble, for sure. Seth Morrison was on the bus. There was like 8 or 9 of us on this bus.
Were there any arrests on that trip?
No arrests. We're going back in time. I'm trying to think of a good specific moment that would be funny. I'm having trouble right now. Basically, it was Groundhog Day for about 12 days in a row. We would drive overnight. We'd show up in the city. We would set up for the movie premiere. Definitely beers and drinking were the pre-party. We would sign a bunch of posters, watch the movie, and then the after party would ensue until probably the last minute possible, and then we would jump in the bus and drive overnight to the next city. It was a fun time, to say the least.
So Skogen gave a little background on the tour, and while I said the MSP tour, thank you to Skogen to add the correct details. It was a Poor Boys Productions and Matchstick Productions tour. And Skogen filmed with them both, which was huge for his career because Poor Boys Productions were the most influential movie company that focused on the new school, and Matchstick Productions at the time was arguably the most influential company when it comes to producing big mountain movies. So Skogen filmed with both companies, and that highlighted the versatility that was his skiing. The only thing that Skogen didn't kill it on was that answer, though. I'm sure there are tons of stories from those buses, and in the future of Inappropriate Questions or just on the podcast, my job is going to be finding out what those stories are, at least the ones that can be told with no repercussions. So now, we will take it back to Mike Douglas, who is going to ask the last inappropriate question of this episode to Clayton Vila. Clayton was part of the Step Crew, a legendary group of street skiers who pushed the envelope of what was possible. With this crew, features got so gnarly that while they were incredible to watch, it didn't look like the crew was having fun producing the clips. It was like this group of badasses wanted to prove to the world that they were a bona fide part of the ski world and they were tougher than you all at the same time. They did that with every movie they put out. And all the Step guys went to film school while they were pro skiers for the most part. And nowadays, some of the coolest commercials and video projects that are coming out of Hollywood have stepped roots. So it's fitting that Mike Douglas, a badass skier and filmmaker in his own right, asked Clayton a question about balls.
Clayton, the first thing I want to know is, with all this street skiing and all this stuff you've been doing, what is the nastiest genital wound that you've either had yourself or you've seen from one of your buddies?
So that was Mike Douglas's first question. Can you tell us the worst genital injury you've seen? I know you've split a lot of rails in your day, and it could be you or one of your crew, but what's the worst thing you've seen?
Yeah, that is a real part of it, the nut rails. But I think that one goes to Shay Flynn in Chicago a few years ago, flying a six kink and slipped in the worst way you could and went from a down to a flat straight to the old cojones. And it was one of those legit horribly concerned, like, should I go to a hospital, pissing blood, whole 9 yards. That happens every once in a while. It's pretty eye-opening and frightening because you kind of forget that that's even possible. And then even the best like him slip up. So, yeah, that one was bad.
So that was part one of Inappropriate Questions from the Vault, the sponsored years. And when I think back to that time, everything was so new to me. I was learning about podcasting every day, and I was building something. The shitty thing is that I was building something for someone else that didn't care about digital media and had lost their way when it came to who they are and how they approach print media. What I'm trying to say is, this podcast was the one thing that Powder had at that time that was doing two things that they used to do. First, the podcast told stories about skiers, which Powder got more and more away from in their later years. And second, the podcast was growing every week. They had a property that was growing, something that Powder Magazine had stopped doing long ago. And in my not-so-humble opinion, if they would have stuck with the podcast and they were able to stay in business, we would have a podcast today that would have at least 50,000 listens a week. And while that sounds like a lot, I believe that the built-in audience that a media powerhouse like Powder had would be at least 5 times the size of the Powell movement after 7 years, even with the staff that really didn't get it all the time when it came to digital media. When we get into Inappropriate Questions from the Vault, the Sponsored Years Part 2, I'll detail out the rest of the saga that I had with Powder, all while hopefully delivering some laughs with inappropriate questions. That's the show. At this point, I'm not going to be reading reviews or anything like that as I'm on vacation, and I can get to that when I return to the desk. I will ask you to submit a review wherever you listen, and if I read it on the show, I'll send you a Powell Movement beanie. This also works for social media posts. Create one telling people how great the show is and why they should listen, and then tag me in it so I see it. If I read that on the show, all you need to do is send me an email at mike@thepowellmovement.com with your address, and you'll get a beanie. Thanks for considering doing it, and thank you for listening. Finally, please support my amazing sponsors who make the show happen. They are Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Elan Skis, Rollerblade, and Peter Glen Ski and Sports. Have a great week, everyone.